Here we are to talk about, I think, karma and emptiness. That's the plan, yeah? Am I on the right track?
Yes, please.
Will we say ask for that? Okay. Thank you, people. All you people, thank you so much. Who else? Let me see the 2 pages. Who else is here? Okay, look at you all. So good to see the faces. I can't cope with Facebook or YouTube because you think you're talking to a wall. It's very nerve-wracking. I kind of feel safer when I see faces, you know. Anyway, good to see you all. Good. Let's go. Okay, so I said don't put prayers up because sometimes we just say the words and we'll kind of sing the tune and we don't even know what we're saying unless you're fluent in Tibetan. So it's really nice just to say the words in English. So I'll just say them in my words. There's just one prayer we're going to start. Just one little prayer that's, this so-called Refuge and Bodhicitta prayers. Just think. And then I'll sing it one time in Tibetan. If you know it, fine. So we just think, okay? Remember, every thought counts. We're going to talk about this. Just think. We're sitting here together. This 2 hours, whatever. 2 hours, 90 minutes. 2 hours?
2 hours,
okay,
yeah, till 5:30 our time.
Yeah, good. So we're sitting here together for 2 hours, and what we're going to do is listening. And even though I'm going blah blah, I'm listening too. I promise. And why are we listening to these words? Because we want to take tools from it. It's got to be practical. It's got to be advice. It's not just to fill our heads with clever thoughts, So it's advice. So advice for what? To develop the 2 wings of the bird, actually. The wisdom wing, which is to develop our own amazing potential. Get rid of all the rubbish, all the neuroses, all the nonsense, so we have clarity and brilliance and wisdom. So on the other hand, we can get the compassion wing, which is to be of benefit to others. Because when we get wisdom, there's no separation between self and other. We just can't bear the thought of all these people suffering without us helping. So it's to develop the 2 wings of the bird to the degree that we can, each time. So every thought so we're thinking we're here together for this reason. But as it says in the prayer, as it says in the prayer, until we are enlightened, we are going to rely upon the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then by the virtuous karmic seeds we drop into our mind by listening to these teachings, we think, may we become a Buddha to be a benefit to all suffering sentient beings. Sangye chadang soke chognam la jancho baru dagni kyabsu chi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupha shog. That's kind of 3 times, roughly. Okay, good. Okay, so now, calm and emptiness. On the face of it, we think, what they've got to do with each other, And when we hear, when we hear the teachings in the framework of the Lam Rim, which is the crucial framework to listen to the teachings within, because we know that Atisha back then, whenever it was, 11th century or something, he went to this vast body of knowledge. Had been going back to the Nalanda tradition, back to the Nalanda monastery, and then all the way back to the Buddha. He took from this vast body of knowledge, this amazing vast body of knowledge. He took the essential points of all that body of knowledge and presented one crucially in an orderly way. And why? Because orderly according to the capacity of the person internalizing it. So he presented it experientially and therefore orderly. So as we know, any body of knowledge we've ever learned since we're tiny, we learn it gradually, We don't say it's a gradual path. We call it a course, don't we? Whether a 25-year course or a weekend course. You start with the beginning stuff, you go to the middle, and then you graduate. Well, here, we're graduating as a Buddha. That's the plan. That's the goal, to graduate as a Buddha. So therefore, like any body of knowledge, if you want to become a physicist, you start with 1 + 1 is 2. It's not explicit at the beginning. Physics is not explicit at the beginning. It's just called math, simple subtraction and multiplication. Well, the same here in the Lam Rim, this marvelous, course to Buddhahood. We've got these different levels, and I always like to call the first one this, as Lama Zopa politely, honoring the lineage, would say that the first part of this path, this Lam Rim, is the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. I mean, that's a mouthful, right? Well, I'd rather call it junior school. Why not? We get it. It might be actually accurate, but it's a perfect example. We get it immediately. So in that level of practice, we know that Atisha, kind of initially, the essence of the whole junior school, the essence of the first scope, the essence of it all culminates in the essence of it, which is where you start to put your money where your mouth is. You start to practice, and that is where you abide by the laws of karma. Everything up until then is priming your mind. We know very well that Atisha first gets us to think about the preciousness of this life, but his action point first is because he doesn't want us to waste it. Then we enter into junior school, entry level, grade 1, and he gets us to think about impermanence. Why? Okay, it's taken from the extensive teachings, isn't it, of the Buddha on impermanence, one of his main philosophical teachings about reality. He's always on about reality. And he's on about reality. Why? Because he says we're living in La La Land. So the main reason to think of why Buddha's telling us all these different things is he's saying, listen guys, this is how reality is, but you have a different view. Your mind is in sync with nonsense, not in sync with reality, and you're living in la-la land. Basically, it's implied. Why else would he teach us so extensively about anything? It's because he says this is how things are, but I'm sorry to say you don't realize that. That's the whole point. He's not just trying to fill our head with... And crucially, he's not just trying to fill our head with clever words. It's got to be experienced. We've got to experience the truth of these things. So the very first thing he gets to think about is impermanence. But a teacher doesn't get all the marvelous, exciting teachings about subtle impermanence, which you can only really access when you've got subtle concentration. No, he gets us right between the eyeballs. He wants us to increase our wake-up call, not to waste our life, by thinking about, guess what, your own death. Just death in general, yeah, but your death. In order to why? He wants us to increase our wake-up call. That's his agenda. Then even more, he wants us to increase our wake-up call, and this is kind of weird for us in our culture. He says, given that you're going to die and you haven't got a clue when, it could be today, well, guess what, people? It's likely, more than likely, you're going to be born as an animal, a hell being, a spirit, or who knows what. And of course, this is kind of, thank you very much, but no thank you. But why he puts this here? Because he wants, his agenda is to increase our wake-up call, not to waste his precious life. And by now, we're kind of getting a bit anxious. What are we going to do? Well, whom can I turn to? Please give me some methods to get the hell out of this mess. So then we take refuge. Extensive teachings on Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Now, then we start to put our money where our mouth is. Now we start to practice. And this is the culmination of junior school. But all of these are priming our mind. This is the point of it. We mightn't see it initially. I know when I first heard the teachings from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I heard the words, but I was just completely drowning in utter confusion. I didn't know what the name of God he was talking about. Why was he telling me about all these strange ideas? Because they don't give you the big picture. You've got to sort of just go along, It's taken me years. Even when I was first working for Wisdom in London, in England, not in London. First working for Wisdom, editing books, and I even began working on Pabonka Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. I left Wisdom before it finished, but there's this massive tome of knowledge. I still didn't really have a clue what he meant by Lam Rim. It was kind of boring, I didn't understand the point. It's taken years for me to even begin to get a sense of the psychological application of this stuff, to get into simple terms. I mean, part of the problem, of course, is Tibetan, and they're like very medieval how they talk, because of course it's been kept beautifully since medieval times. Why not? And then India before that. So it's hard for us to hear it in our own concepts. Which is why for me I was so glad to have Lama Yeshe. I mean, Lama Zopa too, but Lama Yeshe was unbelievable in his skill. It was like, for me, Lama Yeshe was like born a hippie, I promise. He was like born a hippie. He knew how to talk to modern hippies. And when I edit his books now, I'm almost in tears because it's unbelievable, his skill. I don't know how he understood how we thought. It was astonishing, and he got the words. He had disastrous English, but he knew exactly the words, It was astonishing. So I think, but for Lama Yeshe, I don't think I could have stayed. I didn't understand Lama Zopa. It was too high for me. Anyway, whatever. So anyway, then finally in the Lam Rim, and the result, the end was the end of junior school, the culmination of it, the point is where we actually begin to practice. This is where we begin to practice. But a teacher wants us to prime our mind. Lama Tsongkhapa, they want to prime our mind. They don't just leap into karma. They give you the background to why you want to. And by the point is you're so sick of suffering, even the thought of suffering, you better start putting your money where your mouth is. And so karma is the teaching. So the explicit teaching at this point. Okay, so the big picture, remember, we're heading to be Buddha. And always remember, I love remembering this, the etymology of the word Buddha. It tells us exactly what we're doing, It's so tasty. Bud or Jung Chu, what's it called? No, Sangye, Sang, right. Sangye, Sang, Bud implies the utter eradication from our mind of all neuroses, all delusions, all nonsense. This is shocking psychologically, but this is what Buddha is saying. And then not only that, we can develop to perfection, Da, all the goodness, the virtue, the wisdom. This is it. This is Buddha's view. It's so simple, it's almost embarrassing. So we hear the end result, rid of all the rubbish and full of all the goodness. Well, that implies the method, doesn't it? It implies the entire methodology. You better start learning to know your mind. But before he gets us to work on our mind, which is the real job, when we really start becoming Buddhists, that's not until high school. That's not until the middle scope. Because why? Because we've got to start controlling the body and speech, who are the servants of the mind. Our body and speech, our behavior is completely berserk, Control, as Lama Zopa calls, the slaves or the servants of the mind. That's junior school. Abide by the laws of karma. And when we understand the Four Noble Truths, we know very well that's Buddha's method to get rid of the first kind of suffering, the suffering of suffering, when the bad things happen. You don't want bad things to happen in the future, Robina? Well, don't cause it, baby. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, etc. It's so simple. So the view of karma here at that level, explicit one, is ethics. But the long term, remember the Buddha, that's where we're going. We're heading there. So the explicit teaching there, but the implicit teaching, this is where we're going to get now to the business of emptiness, linking them. As we know, if we look into the Ram Rim, first you're going to control your body and speech, and this is abiding by the laws of karma. We'll go into it. That's where you control the servants of the mind, because you can't begin to look at your mind properly if your servants are berserk. You can't begin to see your attachment, your anger, if it just vomits out your mouth, You can't possibly, it's logical. And also, by controlling your body and speech, you at least, the crucial point for the Buddha is you stop creating future suffering. Because guess what? As His Holiness calls karma, is self-creation. It's the best way to put it. Buddha's telling us that we are the creators of our own lives. We are the boss. We don't need an external creator out there. It's an unnecessary embellishment for the Buddha. And meanwhile, it's not viable either. There's no such thing, It doesn't work. It's not possible. When we study the teachings in depth, we'll see that. So Buddha's deal is, and the explicit teaching at this point is, back off, control your body, control your speech, and stop doing actions that he would label negative. The heaviest ones are those that harm others. But his reason for exhorting us not to kill and lie and steal is not because it hurts others. That's his definition of a heavy negative action, is one that harms another. But his reason for exhorting us not to do it is not because it harms others yet. That's too high. That's compassion. That comes later. It's because, guess what, honeys? He says it's going to harm you. This is the hardest one for us in our culture, And also the reason it's hard. Okay, but sorry, I was going to make a point. So the explicit teaching here is just behave nicely. Do what your grandma says. Do what, don't harm others. But now, when we start to look at the end result, if we get the big picture, and we've studied the Lamrim a couple of times, let's say, we know very well that the final stages of the entire path to Buddhahood is the practice of the 6 perfections. The first 4 are what the Bodhisattva does from life to life to life by hooking sentient beings and working in relation to sentient beings, perfecting the compassion wing. And the last 2, concentration and insight into emptiness, perfecting the wisdom wing. So this is the final stages, and that's where we finally, at the very end of the Bodhisattva path, that's where we hear about emptiness. But like all bodies of knowledge, everything that we learn up until then has to lead us to it, doesn't it? So the explicit teaching back in karma, the lower scope, junior school, is stop causing your own future suffering, because you're the creator of your own reality, Robina. That's why he exhorts us not to kill, lie, and steal. But before we go further into it, or even we think, sorry, I'm leaping ahead. But the implicit teaching here, this is where emptiness comes in. The implicit teaching, and we'll only get this as we study more and more. The implicit teaching here is that karma is a brilliant example of the first level of dependent arising, of the 3 levels that Buddha teaches, which are each an argument with the prevailing views at the time from these genius Indians before him. I mean, there's millions of ways that things are dependent arising, but the 3 he teaches are arguments with prevailing views at the time, which is where he diverged in his own direction, As His Holiness says, always quoted, these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. And Buddha went as far as he could go in that one, but he saw that there's still some remainder there. There's still delusions left in the mind. He'd conquered the gross level of suffering. They'd conquered the grossest level of suffering. They'd conquered the suffering of change, but they still had all pervasive suffering. They hadn't realized emptiness. For them, that was liberation. He said, no, there's further to go. So he went in his own direction. And in particular, in relation to his own direct experiential findings about the nature of self. So the relationship then of karma to emptiness, but again, in the beginning, it's not obvious to us. It's implicit, is that karma is a brilliant example of the first level of dependent arising. But guess what, people? All impermanent phenomena exist in dependence upon causes. They are a product of the law of cause and effect. Karma is a brilliant example of this. So it's leading us to emptiness. It's leading us to emptiness. It mightn't be taught like this, but when we sit to understand it, it makes sense. As I said, it's implicit. And why? Let's look at why, thinking about karma. Okay, as Tsongkhapa says, as Lama Yeshe paraphrases him, dependent arising is the king of logics to prove emptiness, okay? There are dozens of examples and debates we need to have with delusions in the mind to unpack and unravel the nonsense so we can realize emptiness, but dependent arising is the king, is the one, is the best. Tsongkhapa says that. His beautiful, hymn of experience, in praise of the Buddha for his teachings on dependent arising. So cause and effect is the first example of dependent arising. So it's a brilliant example of it. So then we're trying, this is leading us, it's helping us loosen the grip of the root delusion. By understanding karma, more and more we practice it. And that's what we want to try and spell out. Why it's a marvelous way to understand emptiness. It's the beginning of understanding emptiness. As I said, it's not implicit, it's not explicit, it's implicit. But we'll go into the explicit teaching first, then we'll look at the implicit one. And that just takes us time from practicing to see this. Yeah, okay, so by abiding by the laws of karma, and the implicit teaching, how it leads us to emptiness, is that it loosens the grip of ego grasping. You know, this colloquial term we can use for the root delusion, Maitripa, ignorance. So how is this? Well, let's look first at the kind of explicit teaching about karma. What is it? As far as Buddha is concerned, and the Hindus came up with this, he didn't invent it. He wasn't the first to observe it. These Indians all came up with this already. They're these genius Indians. They're the ones who invented single point of concentration. They're the ones who first even mapped the mind. The Buddha's view of the mind is coming from these genius Indians. He didn't just chuck out what he learned. He went on further, that's all. And it's only really now, as we know, with this holiness and all this stuff getting published in the West, that people are now seeing this unbelievable wisdom back in India. I mean, we arrogant white people, maybe not all white, or do you get my point? You know, European-based Christians and Jews go back to the Greeks. We love the Greeks, you know. What do we know about India? Zero. But this is what's happening now. It's amazing, all this stuff being published. It's just, and people, now the amazing thinkers in our culture begin to see what existed before. Really, they honour and admire His Holiness. They now see it's real stuff, not just some hippie-trippy religious people. So karma, okay. Buddha says, basically, that every millisecond of whatever we think and do and say sows seeds in our mind. Or I'd like to say it programs our mind. And there's nothing that's left astray. This is a natural law that runs the universe. It's a natural law. So if there's a natural law, it's got to be coherent, doesn't it? It can't be random, it can't be accidental, it can't be just kind of ad hoc. It's got to be coherent. And that's exactly what Buddha says about karma. It's the law that runs the universe. It's every sentient being, every mind possessor, Sem Chen, is existing within the law of cause and effect. And so, of course, we know that cause and effect, we know well cause and effect. We're geniuses at it in our culture. We call it science. Well, Buddha's expertise, you know, isn't how to grow flowers or make lamps or computers. It's how to get happy and stop suffering. Because that's the theme across the board. That's the central piece across the board, all the way to Buddhahood. In fact, it's important to remember, you know, you can argue that there's different doorways into Buddhism. We can see this, you know. One is a method to stop suffering and get happy. That's a fact. One is absolutely a brilliant, coherent system of ethics. But the third one, which is the real point, is that it's a method to stop ignorance and get wisdom. So that in the West, that in modern culture is a bit of a weird one. Who wants wisdom? We're not sure. Happiness, yep. Ethics, not sure. Wisdom, not sure. But happiness for sure. So what is wisdom? Well, this is Buddha's point, isn't it? He is saying essentially, and this is all his teachings are helping us see this, all the Lamrim is presented in this way. He's saying that we're living in La La Land in relation to reality. We've got layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of misconceptions about how things exist in our mind, that we are out of sync with reality. And guess what, folks? That's why we suffer. That's his clear point. This is why there are the teachings on wisdom, not just to be clever and pass your exam at Maitripa and get a certificate. Wisdom is the method to get happy. This is what's utterly fascinating, and this is not how neuroscientists and scientists in our modern culture think. In fact, we know very well, isn't it? We know very well that getting wisdom in our culture means you get a certificate and you're a clever person, you're whatever you are. But it does. But you know, you can be the most genius mathematician on the planet. We know this, and you can still go home and beat up your children and your wife and your husband. We know that. So we don't see wisdom having anything to do with, one, having to do with ethics, or two, to do with happiness. This is Buddha's amazing point. You've got to have ethics, happiness, and wisdom all together. They're utterly integrated. You can't have one without the other. Not a possibility. So it's very kind of holistic. So, first one, basically back off and don't harm. His first little 10 don'ts, isn't it? First 7 of the don'ts of don't harm others. 3 of the body, 4 of the speech. So that the crucial point is, and we don't do this in our culture, we don't like karma. Many people don't like karma at all. We feel, because why? I'll tell you why. Because we've got this ridiculous, deluded, dualistic view about it. We hear it just like we hear it when Jesus says don't kill. I asked a Jesuit priest, the authorities, you know, like the Gulukpas of the Christians. And I said, what is it by definition what is sin by definition? By definition, a sin, he said, is doing what God said not to do. Now, this is totally perfect if you posit a creator, and Buddha doesn't, we know that. So that fits. If you believe in a creator, the creator has a plan. He doesn't need to share his plan with you. He keeps it in his pocket. That's perfectly fine because you have faith in him. That is a brilliant way to live your life, I tell you. I would never argue with that way of living life. But 99% of Christians moan and complain about God, don't they? That's incredible. So naturally, he said this priest said there's some aspect of natural law in Jesus exhorting us not to kill. But the real reason is because God said not to. And that is what a sin is. This is so powerful. Now that's what we think negative actions are. And we made that view up. That's coming from ego grasping. That's a dualistic view that we made up. Don't believe it. Don't blame your Jewish mummy or your Catholic mummy. That dualistic view of punishment and reward, we have made that up, and it's a function of ego grasping. When you've got the non-dualistic view of Buddha, there's no view like that. There's no view like punishment and reward. So karma, in Buddhism, there's no such thing as punishment and reward when it comes to this natural law. You don't go to your doctor and she says, don't smoke. Why not? Oh, because I'm going to punish you with cancer. I mean, that's how we think of morality. That's why we're so neurotic. That's how we don't like karma. We don't hear it properly. We hear it as punishment and reward because we've got that view in our mind. It's already in us, the neurotic view among our delusions, So we've got to hear karma properly. We've got to unpack it properly. If it's a natural law, it means no one runs it. It's not punishment. It's not reward because there's no punisher and there's no rewarder. We have to think these things out. And slowly we'll start to grow up and become accountable, because this is the point, how we loosen the grip of ego grasping. In the beginning, if we're an ordinary person, samsaric person, and we've got ego grasping, the root delusion, which gives rise to attachment, which gives rise to aversion, then the other 82,997 neurotic states of mind, then we're going to have all these, we're going to be a victim. It sounds very brutal, but Lama Yeshe often would refer to ego grasping, the root delusion, as self-pity me. And you analyze our own minds. Look at the philosophy we have in our mind now, and that is reinforced by neuroscience. It's reinforced by modern psychology. I'm not trying to be fundamentalist here. I'm not trying to argue, not to be rude. Listen to my point. We naturally just get born, and then we have the philosophy that mummy and daddy created me. Now that means I played no role in who I am. It almost seems silly to even assert that. I played no role, did I? We say, I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. Do we not say that? Is that not how ego feels? So that's so powerful. So if you really do believe you didn't ask to get born, means you play no role in who you are, and these two neurotic mummy and daddy hop into bed and make you and chuck you out, and then you're neurotic and deluded and strange and weird and have all these unhappy states of mind. Mummy and daddy have to have given them to you. But then you go to your therapist and she says you've got to forgive your mother. Well, I don't know why. I'm not joking here, but hear my point. If they really did make you, then they are the blame. Do not listen to your stupid therapist. Blame your parents and sue them as much as you can. I am not joking. That fits with the philosophy that your mother and father made you. Okay, it's now getting a bit nerve-wracking, because if we do the same about God, we've got to blame God as well. But we can't do that, can we? Except Italians do. But one Argentinian told me they're even worse than the Italians. God is a pig, I heard. Lama Yeshe, when he was in hospital in Italy, visiting his friend Geshe Jamba Gyatso. Rinpoche knows him, I'm sure. He was I don't know if he's one of his teachers, but he was at Kopan, same time as Rinpoche. He was a little boy. And he was in hospital, Geshe Jamba Gyatso, and Lama Yeshe was visiting him. This is like late 70s, early 80s. And then the Italian boys in the ward were telling Lama what the Italian men were saying. And that God is a pig, And Our Lady apparently gets even worse insult. She's a whore, I mean, I know I was a Catholic. Our family, we never said one bad word about Buddha, about God. We would have been shocked, But there's some reason. Anyway, Italians get upset if I say this, but it's true. So we don't want to blame God. But it's the same dualistic view. You could argue the one view that the materialists and the Christians and the Muslims agree on is that they both agree that someone else made us. One lot say it's the creator, the other lot say it's mummy and daddy. It's the same view. It's both out there, and that we have no role in it. And that we began in our mother's womb. Well, Buddha disagrees with that, this and that. He disagrees. He says, no, not like that. He says, your mind is beginningless. I'm sorry, Robina. And if it's the product of cause and effect, it has to be beginningless. You can't have a first cause. Apparently the Christians have a lot of deep discussion about how you can have a first cause. Buddha argues with that very clear. No such thing is not viable. So therefore beginningless is the only option, as nutty as it sounds to us, because we all believe there's a first something. Always looking for the first cause, As His Holiness said one time with all these discussions with scientists when they talked about the Big Bang, he said no problem, Big Bang, no problem, just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So beginninglessness is a view of the Buddhas, and it fits intellectually and logically with the concept of cause and effect. So your mind isn't beginningless. Number one. Number two, it's the product of the law of cause and effect. No one runs that law. 3, every millisecond of what you think and do and say sows seeds in your mind, programs your mind, or produces the future you. 4, you could say then the next level of detail of karma, and this is the whole business of happiness and suffering, that every millisecond of what you do is labelled negative, and we should go into this exactly. What is labelled negative will sow a seed in your mind that will necessarily ripen as your future suffering. 4 kinds. Sorry, finish. Anything that's called virtuous is an action done, triggered by a virtuous state of mind that will ripen as your future happiness. We'll go into the details about this. So this is a natural law that runs the universe, like botany, like gravity. It's just a natural law. The Buddha has observed it. These dudes before him observed it. We have to observe it. But first it's our hypothesis, isn't it? We haven't got clairvoyance yet. This is the natural law that runs the universe. So, the very first level of practice then for the Buddha, he, like Jesus says, don't kill, don't steal. You need to ask Buddha why not. Don't just accept it. We don't ask why. We should ask why. What's your logic? Well, honey, two things. He first exhorts us to at least stop the heaviest negative actions, which are those that harm others. They're the heaviest ones. So at least he exhorts us to don't kill, don't 3 of the body, don't kill, don't jump on the wrong partner, and that's the usual one. Otherwise, there's other ways of talking out there. And then don't take the ungiven. Then 4 of the speech, which is our favourite. Us humans, we're good at this. No bad-mouthing behind backs, no rabbiting on about nothing, no saying words that aren't true, and no abusive speech. The 7 little baby instructions, 7 little things he would exhort us to refrain from. And you ask him, why, Buddha? Well, first he says that these are negative actions because they really harm others. But honey, the reason I'm exhorting you not to do these at this point is because guess what? Those actions, driven by your delusions, will sow seeds in your mind and will ripen one as a type of suffering rebirth, or a happy one, whichever one you do. No, so he's exhorting us to not do. So the 7 negative ones, those first 7, he says don't do because 1, they will cause you to be born in a lower realm. 2, they'll cause you to have that tendency to keep doing that dumb action. 3, they'll cause you to have it done to you. And 4, it'll even impact upon the environment, and that will cause you to suffer the relation to the environment. These are the 4 ways that karma ripens. This is his findings, and it's all there in the literature. So you say to yourself, do I want future suffering? Do I want to forget about lower realms. Do I want to get killed, lied to, raped, stolen from? No, thank you. Well, then it's like you go into the health shop. I love all those homeopaths. They've got A to Z medicines, and they've got A to Z remedies. You look up arthritis, you go, oh, A, arnica. There it is. Go home and take your medicine. Buddha's like that. You don't want to get killed in the future? Don't kill. You don't want to keep killing? Then don't kill. You don't want to have a lousy environment where the food poisons you and you get COVID-19 and die young? Then don't kill. You don't want to have the environment harm you like it is now. Your mummy is now poison for you. You kiss your mother, you could get COVID-19 and die. Then you don't want environmental karma like that? Then don't kill. It's really simple what he says. But we bring this drama to it because we're full of all this guilt and shame and God and punishment. We bring that junk. He's just saying something very simple, We make a fuss and bother about it. Fight and yell and scream and can't handle it because we can't hear it properly. Now that's the explicit teaching. So instead of hearing it as guilt, instead of hearing it as blame, instead of hearing it as punishment, and we rip ourselves to pieces and get guilt and all this drama, it's like when you go to the doctor and she diagnoses your problem and she's got a solution, you're in heaven. Thank you so much for telling me what to do, and you'll go home and you will eat exactly the right food that she says. You will never dream of eating the slightest wrong food because you don't want future suffering. We get it when it comes to our body, but not our ridiculous mind. We're like infants, So it's self-respect. Got nothing to do with punishment. Nothing to do with reward. But the trouble is Tibetans, they're very 10th century, even as they're my lamas. But the way they talk is heavy. They're like fundamentalists, how they talk. That's why Lama Yeshe was so helpful to Westerners. He spoke in a kind of sweet way, a different way, We can eat it, we can understand it. These are the words I'm trying to use to help me understand it so I don't get neurotic, It's self-respect. Abiding by the law of karma is self-respect. It's unbelievable. So what is the consequence of you abiding by the laws of karma? Forget future lives. What's the consequence now? This is the implicit teaching now. Because you're stopping feeling like a victim. You're suddenly taking responsibility that every single tiny thing that happens to you in this life, all the happiness and all the suffering, guess what? It's like your garden. What's in your garden, honey, you put it there. You put the weeds there and you put the flowers there. So when we think this way, as Lama Zopa says, everything we experience is our own karmic appearance, So we own it. You own it. So that means you're less victim. How dare that? We never would say, we look in our garden, we would never say, who put weeds in my garden? I don't deserve weeds. We would not say that for a logical reason. It's my garden, and as soon as I say my garden, I know they're my weeds. I know they're my flowers. That's exactly how it is with karma. But this is like screaming and kicking to get to see this. It's so hard for us because the other views are so entrenched, the samsaric views. The innocent victim view is so instinctive, which is the view of ego grasping. I'm innocent. What goes on out there has nothing to do with me. That's literally insanity. Lama Yeshe would often say that's schizophrenic. I'm this innocent victim to whom bad things and good things happen. We don't mind the good. Give me more, please. We don't like the bad. We can't cope. So that's the neurotic mind, because we don't have the view of cause and effect. The bodhisattvas have such compassion for us. Forget about because we don't realize emptiness, of course that, but because we don't realize cause and effect. Look at all the world running around like chooks. We say in Australia, like chook with your head off. A chook is a chicken. Going berserk, Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to them? We have no explanation. The West, we're still trying to work it out with our scientists. Jesus has a reason. The Muslims have an answer. It's God's will. If you accept God's will, I tell you, you're a happy person. But the materialists are still trying to find it out. Buddha's got his view. You made your own garden, baby. You created your garden. And then ownership comes. Then you become, so what happens? You get less neurotic. You get less guilty. You get less angry. You get less attachment. You get less fearful. You're more courageous. You're more owning your experiences. That is loosening the grip of the ego grasping. That's loosening the grip of the self-pity me. That's the implicit teaching. That's how you get closer to emptiness. So even by abiding by the laws of karma, you're moving towards understanding there's no inherent nature. Nothing exists from its own side, It's so tasty, I tell you. We've got to practice, not just have it theoretical. And it's hard. Holy God, it's so hard. You have people who are teachers. I mean, neurotic people. Like me, I'm supposed to do this job of teaching. Lama Zopa said to do it, and I do my best. But I'm a completely neurotic person like everybody else. Still believe how people cause me suffering. You get political and blame people. It's so deep, this teaching. Karma's outrageous. It's so subtle, But to really see the benefit of it, you've got to be like a hawk every day, constantly applying the words, constantly applying the theory. Don't just leave it in your books. As Lama Zopa says, everything we experience out there, what's out there is our own karmic appearance, every millisecond. Now, one of the interesting points, it shows how neurotic we are, because the very first level of teachings about karma are related to the negative ones. So then we tend to think it's all about the negative. We never, I joke, but I'm serious. I've never yet had a question, ever had a question from somebody, and it says, Robina, why do good things happen? We only ever ask, why do bad things happen? And we only ever, when we realize that we cause it, we are shattered. You mean I did something bad? The commonest thing we ask is, you mean that little child who gets raped did something bad? I mean, all it shows is the misconceptions in our mind, if we take Buddha's view as the truth here. These are the views in our mind already. These are the philosophical views in our mind already. The view of innocent victim is no one has to teach you that. You're born with it because you've got ego grasping. Your mother didn't teach you that. No way. You're programmed, come into it in the first second of conception. This is the deepest habit in us. So it's so incredible when we can apply karma to happiness. But it's so astonishing we never think about it. In other words, if we looked in one day at all the good things that happened to us, simple, ordinary, the fact you've got a house, some money in the bank, reasonable friends, you open your mouth in a shop and people don't want to throw you out. They believe your words. You might get credit from the bank. We utterly and completely take these things for granted. And as soon as one bad thing's happen, we have a panic attack. We all know we're like this. This just shows the shockingness of our delusions, So this deserve is a powerful indicator of this. You don't say, who put weeds in my garden? I don't deserve it. You don't say that. It wouldn't even arise in our mind. Look at the mistake. Look at the actual mistake in that view. There's an assumption that you don't realize it's your garden. You don't realize it's your garden, but you still say, who put weeds in my garden? It's schizophrenic. You wouldn't say that, because my garden implies what's in it I put there, or I didn't pull out what's there. We own that. You don't look in your bank account. How dare there are no dollars in my bank? I deserve dollars, We never say that. So this is exactly the same here. But we totally feel in our bones the pain, the hurt, when the person even accuses of something slightly wrong. The pain of it is so real. We shouldn't just dismiss this. This shows the depth of our delusions, We don't really start to learn to delusions until we get to high school. Now we start to work on our mind. And that's where we have to understand the three poisons. First we control the servants of the mind, now we start to control the mind. This is where we actually become a Buddhist. Good ethics is done by good communists, good anybody. That's common behavior, good ethics. Karma might be unique to the Buddha's view, but good ethics is common to everybody, nothing special. But now you get to the middle scope, you get to the second cause, the main cause of suffering, which is the delusions. This is where we actually become a Buddhist. This is unique to the Buddha. So, first we control the servants of the mind. First we control the servants of attachment and anger. Now we control the attachment and anger, where we get to high school, middle scope. Because that's the essence of the middle scope. It's the Four Noble Truths, suffering and its causes, blah, 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 all the stuff about all the different realms, whatever. But the essence of high school, the essence of junior school, the lower scope is karma. The essence here is work on your mind, control your mind. So we all know, Buddha's got this map of the mind. I always ask the lamas and the geshis, I've asked Yang Sumsha, I think, and the geshis, no one can ever tell you where this map is, but you always hear that Buddha says there are 84,000 delusions. I'd like to see the map, please. And I remember young Ling Rinpoche, I think he's been there. People have told me they've never heard this before, but he always says it. It's wonderful. He says the three poisons, as we know, it's ego grasping, ignorance, the root delusion. We can call it ego grasping when it comes to grasping at me. Then you've got attachment, when the little me doesn't get what it wants. And then you have aversion and panic attack when the attachment doesn't get what it wants. There's just three, you've got a hierarchical relationship. And these are profound. They sound so cute. Oh, the three poisons. You don't go to your therapist, I've got the three poisons. I've got an affliction. Tell you to shut up and go home until you want to kill your boyfriend. These dumb words. I never use the word affliction, ever. So, we've got these three neurotic states of mind. Three mental illnesses. At least Geshe Sopa would say mental affliction. This wonderful word, what is it what's the word in Sanskrit? Klesha, okay? And then I don't know what the Tibetan word is, I don't speak Tibetan. But the one we typically translate it as, everybody does it, it's just the correct word in English dictionary, affliction. But, even Lama Yeshe, I remember Lama Yeshe, it was amazing, when I was editing his Mahamudra book last year, a couple of years ago, it's out now from Wisdom, it's a gorgeous book. Lama never said it. I identified 21 different synonyms, some in the literature and some he made up, in his incredible effort to explain to us how these neurotic states of mind work. You say affliction till the cows come home, you won't understand it, Oh, I've got all these afflictions. Lama never said it. He never used that word. He just knew automatically it was a dumb word because it's arcane. I'm not trying to insult the lamas because they all say it. His Holiness says it too. So these neurotic states of mind. Now we have to now understand this model of the mind in Buddhism, which is so unique to the Buddha. It's a brilliant model. One way of talking about it, Buddha divides, we've got sensory consciousness and mental consciousness. So forget the sensory, although we give so much power to our bodies. But sensory consciousnesses are like dumb animals. They're very limited in their capacity for cognition. So forget them, although we give them too much power. But the mental consciousness is where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. That's what we have to learn to unpack and unravel and identify and then deconstruct and get rid of and eventually perfect. That's the job of being a Buddhist. You calm your body and speech down first, then you can do the real job, being your own therapist, as Lama Yeshe puts it. So as we know, Buddha divides all the thoughts and feelings and emotions in our head, billions of them, into three categories, and there's no fourth. And this is all sentient beings that Buddha's covering, not just humans. There's the negative, neurotic, deluded, non-virtuous, all these broad synonyms. Unhappy, neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, painful states of mind. Then you've got the valid, reasonable, virtuous, positive, useful, beneficial states of mind. Virtuous. Then you have the third category, they're called neutral, but that really throws us. But what it means is they're neither virtuous in their character nor non-virtuous. And I like to call them the mechanics. And what are they? Concentration, good memory, discrimination, even feeling, which is a very interesting one. Might come into our discussion today. Many of these, and if these aren't working properly, you've lost your mind. But these are not virtuous or non-virtuous in their character. And that's why we have to know what Buddha means by that. We have to study what he means by it exactly, not bring our neurotic blame mentality to them, Understand exactly what the characteristics of a non-virtuous state of mind, of a deluded state of mind, of a negative state of mind, of a neurotic state of mind, and of an afflicted state of mind. This is so specific to the Buddha. It's a revelation when we can understand it, Then we have the positive ones: love, compassion, generosity, all these. The other lot: attachment, anger, jealousy, pride. 84,000. Now, young Ling Rinpoche says 21,000 are rooted in ego grasping, the root delusion. 21 or ignorance. 21,000 are rooted in attachment, and 21,000 are rooted in anger. And then the other 21,000 are rooted in all three. I mean, what a coherent map! How amazing! Remember, His Holiness offered $750,000 to some neuroscientist, to map the mind. Well, he doesn't need to map the damn mind. He'd done it already, but he's so kind and humble, helping the modern people map the mind, the brain. But they mapped it for 3,000 years ago. Come on. So this is an amazing model of the mind. But we Buddhists, we somehow still don't think of it as psychology. We're so actually insulting to Buddha. We think real psychology, you got to get a degree in real psychology. You learn about OCD, CADID, God Almighty knows what. I'm not being sarcastic. That's real psychology. But anger, oh, that's just an affliction. Attachment, oh, that's just an affliction. We're so rude. We're so demented, We have no idea what Buddha's on about. Buddha's view is profound and amazing and unbelievable and in depth and breadth and brilliant. And Buddha's got this methodology to help you rid the mind utterly of all neuroses and develop to perfection of all goodness. There's no method in the universe in modern psychology or neuroscience that suggests that. So come on, people, psychology. Buddha's your genius, best psychologist in the universe. I'm not being stupid. So we have to understand the mind. Now, interestingly, how does that help us understand emptiness? This is very interesting. This is not directly related to karma, but this is really helpful. Again, the explicit teachings here are to control your mind and to learn to see this one component of these unhappy states of mind, which is that they're deeply, profoundly, horribly disturbing. That's what Buddha wants us to do. That's the explicit teaching here, to see how disgusting and painful anger, attachment, and jealousy and all the other 83,000 something or other are. This is our job here. That's the explicit teaching, to give up attachment and anger. As Lama Zopa says, you've got renunciation. You've got renunciation of suffering and its causes when just the thought of another moment of attachment is so repulsive. It's like being in a septic tank. So way to go, people, okay? This shows how humble we have to be, to see how far we have to go. Because attachment, as Lama Yeshe said, I can tell you about it for one whole year. You'll never begin to understand it until we go deep into our own mind. This is the job of being a Buddhist. Not just doing your malas and taking refuge and looking holy. It's unpacking and unraveling the chaos in here. So what's this got to do with emptiness? I mean, it's not the point of the discussion, but it's a helpful point. Again, the explicit teaching here is see the disgustingness and the unhappiness, but not out of guilt. It's out of self-respect, like you're fed up with the suffering that's coming from all the sugar you're eating. You're sick of the suffering. You've been so used to it for years you haven't even noticed, but now you realize that you're sick of the suffering that sugar is causing you. You're sick of the suffering that wrong food is causing you. You're sick of the suffering that those cigarettes are causing you. You've been so used to it you haven't noticed. That's what renunciation is. You're renouncing suffering and its causes. So we swim in attachment. This is our default mode. We won't really get rid of it until we realize emptiness, so don't hold your breath. But we've got to understand it properly. But how does this, so the explicit teaching is to steady the mind. Watch your mind like a hawk. Look at the delusions that inform your behavior. Look at the delusions that inform everything we think and do and say, and learn to unpack and unravel them. And how can you do that if you don't study Lorig? You can't. You can't just put your meaning of anger and attachment onto these words. Buddha's view is so specific. We mislead ourselves because we all know the word anger, we know the word jealousy, we know the word compassion, but we don't know what he means by them. He has 3 categories of states of mind, people. We don't have this in neuroscience. It's hilarious. The neurotic, deluded, I-based ones that have no basis in reality, they're living in la-la land and they're disturbing. The second lot that are valid, reasonably and relatively in sync with reality, not until you realize emptiness, they're really in sync with reality, but they're the virtues and they're at the core of our being. And the third lot, the mechanics. It's an incredible distinction. It's so crystal clear. And that's the basis for discriminating what the hell is going on in our mind every second. If we don't have that discrimination, we can't tell the difference between attachment and love. We wouldn't have a clue the meaning. We conflate them. We assume they're the same. We have to have this distinctive model, Buddha's is extraordinary. Don't just learn it and keep it in your head and then go to a therapist and understand your ODC or OCD, whatever it's called. It's called attachment, okay? PTSD, that's attachment. All come down to attachment. It sounds cliched, but attachment is multifaceted. So it needs a lot of looking into and thinking about and analysing and then observing in the mind. So again, what the point I'm getting at here, what's the explicit teaching in the next level, this level of practice, is to start to control your delusions. Why? Because you're sick of suffering. It's still for your benefit. We're not even discussing compassion yet. This is compassion for yourself. The wisdom wing here is compassion for yourself. We're not even going anywhere near compassion for others yet. We've got to be revolted by our own suffering and know the causes of our own suffering and be sick of our own suffering. Then that's the basis of valid compassion for others. We often just skip over this part. Oh yeah, I've got compassion for other people. Oh, I'm not suffering. You missed the point completely. So it's out of interest that the implicit teaching here, there's two main functions of these neuroses. One is they're disturbing, and that's the main teaching in the middle scope, to calm that down because you're sick of the pain. Not to mention, by following your anger and following your attachment, you sow seeds in your mind that will produce further suffering. That's the long term. But the implicit teaching is when you start to understand this other function of these unhappy states of mind. That's indicated by the word delusion. This is delicious, I tell you. We say that word very casually. Oh, delusions, yeah, I'm so deluded. But it's a brilliant word in English. I think in Spanish, in Italian, in German, in many other languages, as I go to different countries, there's no real use of this word. In Spanish, it's very arcane. They don't use it much. But the meaning in English is absolutely bullseye for what Buddha's saying. And this is the root of the thing. This is also leading us to understand emptiness. And what I mean is this. Delusion, when someone accuses you of being, what's the time? Maybe we should get some questions soon. I'm raving on here. Well, I'll talk a bit more, then I'll get some questions. And then we'll talk about emptiness. We'll get to emptiness. So, okay. So here we're preparing our mind for emptiness as well, by understanding what a delusion is. So delusion is another term for disturbing emotion, another term for an affliction. What's it mean? It's brilliant in English. If someone accuses you of being delusional, they're accusing you of not being in touch with reality. Well, guess what Buddha's telling us across the board? That's what ignorance is, and all the delusions. They're causing us to be not in sync with reality. So what that means is when attachment is in my mind and the chocolate cake on the plate, there is a brown triangle there, and we know it's labeled chocolate cake. Conventionally, it is chocolate cake, definite. But what we see on that plate and what is there and what we think is on the plate and what is on the plate, there's a complete disconnect. This is how across the board the delusions function. We put our attachment glasses on and the cake will look divine, won't it? So these are the branch delusions. So by understanding this aspect of these disturbing emotions, how they are misconceptions. And what this demands we understand, which is what we get when we study low rig, we won't get it until we study, that these disturbing emotions, aren't just emotions as we think about, which is when the body's involved. You're in tears, the heart is beating, the words are coming out your mouth, the eyes are wide with fear and panic and all the dramas. That we think that's the only time we notice we have an unhappy experience, when the body is telling us. But we've got to learn to go beneath the physical component, which is just the physical, and get to see the actual anger itself, which is a misconception. We function at the mental consciousness level. You've got either conceptuality or you have the subtle level of mind, which they call perception, when you've got single point of concentration eventually, where you go beyond conception and beyond sensory. We don't touch on that unless we've got concentration. So we live at the level of conceptuality. We live at the level of conceptuality for the Buddha. And that includes not just up here, all the clever thoughts, but here as well. We think of this as emotion, and that's conceptuality. It's all conceptuality. And this is the shocking part. And this is Buddha's unique approach to the mind. So when you begin to, notice the angry thoughts that inform the angry experience, the angry body, the angry shouting, that's when you start to be a Buddhist. Then you understand. And then you'll see how those angry thoughts are literally misconceptions. Literally, they are not valid concepts. They are misconceptions. Or the attachment is a misconception. It's deep in the bones of the mind. We've had it since the beginning of time. We come totally programmed with primordially deep attachment. So primordial, we can't even see that it's a conception. We don't realize that the cake what attachment is doing is making up a story about the cake. So so this is the key function of all these neurotic states of mind, all the delusions, all the disturbing emotions. They exaggerate, they embellish, they, as Lama Zopa says, they decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that just aren't there in that cake. Now that's what all delusions do, but each delusion has its own job. So attachment, when you're all hungry and excited about the cake, attachment makes it look divine. After the 5th piece of cake and you want to vomit, what's left of the cake will now look repulsive. Still not even cold yet. Because why? Because you've got another, the attachment is gone because you're stuffed full, and now aversion has taken over. And now they're the branch delusions, and these you deal with in high school. But they are preparing us to get to university level. They're preparing us for the compassion wing. They're preparing us for the 6 perfections. They're preparing us for the last of the 6, which is wisdom. Then we get to the root delusion, and that's where they start to talk about how it's a misconception. They're all misconceptions. That's their character. They lead us up garden paths. And because they're so ancient, we for never 1 second never believe for an instant that the cake I see on the plate isn't the cake that's on the plate. I'm seeing it through the lenses of my neediness and my attachment and my hunger and my greed. And then when there's 6 pieces in my stomach and I'm vomiting, I will now see what's left of the cake through the lenses of disgusting and aversion. It's the same with a boyfriend. But we never, 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 never question this process. We never join the dots. This is enough to prove emptiness to us right there. Where's the cake from its own side? It ain't there, baby. But we don't get the lesson. We don't learn. So here, the explicit teaching of working on the mind is to start to see the pain of these neuroses and want to give them up. Now, but deeper, as we keep practicing, we're going to start to see the delusional component. And that prepares us to easily understand now ego grasping the root delusion when we start to look into this and unpack and unravel this and deconstruct this and get to see finally, ultimately, how things exist. So the Lamrim prepares us totally, primes our mind perfectly to get us to realize emptiness. Everything leads to that. But it's not obvious to us in the beginning, you know. So let's stop now, ask questions, then I'll talk about emptiness, because we've got to emptiness. So ask questions if you have any. If not, then...
Yes. Oh, hello. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, thank you for everything. I really love this because it's like, well, like, take responsibility for everything, right? And it's like, well, at the same time, yeah, you're right. It doesn't sound too good because chaos could come at any moment, right? And it's like...
I'm losing... Andy, I'm completely losing you. Can you ask me a question, dear?
Oh, yeah. So it's
Thank
like
you.
Chaos can... Okay, I'll ask you a question.
Good, that's much better.
Okay, so how do you think about this chaos that could come at any moment?
Andy,
like,
I've got no idea what you're talking about. Are you a Buddhist or what? Where are you studying Buddhism? You don't sound like a Buddhist. What do you mean chaos that can come at any minute? What the hell are you talking about? Excuse me, being rude.
You're like,
sweetheart, can you tell me, what do you mean by this chaos that can come at any minute, Andy? Forgive me, I'm sorry. What do you mean, darling? What do you mean that chaos can come at any minute? What does this mean?
So it's like, well, the way I understand this, it's like, well, you want to create order, and that's why
Andy,
you
I don't know what you're talking about. Are you a Buddhist or what? Are you talking like some other weird person? Are you not using Buddhist language?
You talked about chaos in order to...
I never said those words once in my whole life. I might have said chaos in your mind.
Okay, let me put it in another word.
Ask me a question,
okay. So all the bad realms, for example, right?
Stop. What?
Should I use all the lower realms, right?
Okay, like, what's your question, darling? Just ask the question.
Yeah. There's this fear about this, right?
Andy, so ask a question, I beg you. I don't want all your commentary.
Yeah.
Just ask me a question, precious. Listen, I'm sorry, I'm very rude. I know.
Do I use it to motivate myself to study and practice?
Okay, what do you think?
Or is that still kind of like a...
Andy, darling, tell me what you think based on all the teachings based on the teachings you've heard, Andy, based on the teachings you've heard in this center at Maitripa, based on the Lamrim and understanding Buddha's view of the universe and how there are different realms of existence, how they're all caused by negative karma and deluded minds. What so far do you feel is the learning for you in your life about those teachings, Andy? Tell me what you think, sweetheart.
Well, the way I think would be a good approach is to, like, hey, I'm going to stop planting all these
Okay, good. Now we're getting somewhere. So Buddha,
these
so first
weeds,
of all,
right?
Andy, let me ask you a question then. So you've heard the Buddha's teachings, and you've heard the big picture that he says there are trillions of sentient beings, trillions of mind possessors, and we cause our own suffering and we cause our own happiness. That point first you've got. You
Right.
agree with that one? Theoretically, right? It's a hypothesis right now, isn't it? So then we hear that there's not just humans. There are billions upon billions upon billions of sentient beings. And then when we study the middle scope and we learn about the delusions, where we study low rig, we're going to realize that all these realms of existence are just expressions of different states of mind created by those sentient beings. So we've got the three poisons. We've got ignorance, the root delusion. Well, one expression of that in terms of a realm is to be born in the animal realm, where the predominant energy is incredible, unbearable igno-grasping, unbearable limited mind called ignorance. Then you've got the spirits, which is the expression of unbelievable attachment. And then you have the hells, which is the expression of unbelievable anger. And because there's no creator and there's no punishment and there's no reward, Buddha has observed that these sentient beings have created these realities themselves, just like we have. So that's Buddha's analysis. So if we're taking that as our working hypothesis, you obviously know that you don't want that kind of future suffering, so then you try to be a nice person, which is junior school and high school. That's the basis. That's the point of Buddha's teaching, sweetheart. Does that make sense, Andy? That's the answer
Right,
to
that
your
makes
question.
sense. And so my question is, what do I do about all the weeds that are already in my garden?
So you've never heard of purification? No? You've never heard of the four opponent powers? Lama Zopa says we're insane not to do it every day. So there's in junior school level, the lowest scope, the very first practice to do, Andy, as Lama Zopa says, the most immediate practice to do is to stop killing, stop lying, stop sowing more weeds. The next level of practice to do is to practice that virtue in the framework of living in vows, which makes it 1 billion times more powerful. You're putting atomic bombs under your habit to kill and lie and steal by living in vows. Then your next practice would be to start working on all the billions of seeds you've already planted that haven't yet ripened. And that's purification. If you just did junior school, all this practice, you will die with a happy mind and get an excellent future life. That's the answer, sweetheart. Are we communicating?
Okay. So what I hear you're saying is that just trust yourself that you can accomplish this.
I did not say those words. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't make things up. I did not say that.
Oh, you're like, because I say that because you're like, well, at death you'll die with a calm mind,
Andy,
and you'll be able to finish the job. That's basically what I'm saying.
Andy,
yeah.
May I just say one more point to you? Then you can ask someone else a question. Sweetheart, listen to me. Do you understand that if you knew botany, let's say you're a very good gardener and you've learned the laws of botany, that's a possibility, isn't it? You agree, sweetheart? Communicate with me.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Let's say you know botany really well, and I've never heard of such a law. And I see you've got an acre of ground, and it looks to me like boring, but you've sowed a pile of seeds in that ground. And then you know very well that you could proceed to give me a perfect vision of that garden in 10 years. You could do that, couldn't you?
Right.
Because, stop.
Yes,
one step
exactly,
at a time. One step at a time, Andy, because you understand the law of botany, right? Do you understand that? And but I don't know there's such a thing, and I'll go, wow, Andy, you're clairvoyant. You'll say, no, Robina, I just know the laws of botany. So karma's like that, Andy. You learn the laws. You take on board. You don't have to. Buddha's not forcing you. But if you like the Buddha, if you listen to him carefully, you take it as your working hypothesis, and you learn that you don't just say you like karma. You don't just believe in karma. You can't just believe in botany, Andy. It won't work. You've got to learn it thoroughly, all the laws, so you can predict that you will get a good, decent human rebirth when you die in exactly the same way. You can predict your garden in 10 years. So relax and go one step at a time, honey.
Okay, yes, perfect. Okay, thank you
very much. Are there any other questions? I'll try and be more polite. I don't know, maybe.
Venerable, hello, this is Rocio.
Hello, Rocio.
I do have a question, and I'll try to ask the question.
Talk to me.
So we're talking about karma, and we're talking about karma and then emptiness. That's going to be the second part. Is this karma that we're talking, like, are you referring to it as dependent arising also?
No, they're not.
Dependent?
No, thank you so much. Perfect, Rocio. No, karma, okay, if we look at dependent arising, we're going to go into this in a minute. dependent arising, as we all know, I'm quoting Lama Yeshe paraphrasing Tsongkhapa, who's quoting Buddha, that dependent arising is the king of logics to understand emptiness. So there's different levels of dependent arising that we'll discuss in a minute. But the first level of dependent arising that Buddha taught as an argument with the prevailing views at the time was that there's a view that there's the I, there's a self that's permanent and uncaused and unchanging. And the Buddha's argument very clearly is there can't be such a thing. So the law of karma is the proof. The law of karma is an example of that view. It's an example of how you are not just an innocent victim who didn't ask to get born. You're not just set in stone. You can change. You are the fruit of past actions. That's the law of karma. So karma is a brilliant example of the first level of dependent arising, which is that things are the result of causes. That's the point. That's the relationship. That's the point. Do you understand what I'm saying, Rocio? Is that clear?
Yes. So the next part of that, we're going to talk a little bit. Are you going to talk a little bit more about the other parts or the
dependent arising? There's two more levels of dependent arising. We'll go into those as well. But the talk here is to show how, when the very first level of practice, the explicit teaching is to be a nice person and stop killing and stealing and lying because you don't want future suffering. But as we become more familiar with that and we program our minds with karma and have this confidence that that's a natural law that does work, then we start to realize it's causing us to loosen the grip of self-pity, not fair, poor me, I didn't ask to get born, of attachment, anger, low self-esteem, and jealousy. That's what I'm saying, that by applying the law of karma really sincerely, it loosens the grip of ego grasping, which is leading us to understand emptiness. That's the relationship. You see my point? Good. Thank you, Rocio, very much. Namdrol, yes, Namdrol.
I'm just wondering, Robina, you referred earlier in your talk to this criticism that people have sometimes when you're just trying to explain basic laws of karma, and they say, oh, does that mean if a little kid gets raped, it's her fault, right?
Yeah, that's right, yes.
So what's the response to that for somebody who's not deeply working with these things?
Exactly, I understand that. I will then say to that, one of the things I would say is that, tell me about the good qualities this little girl has. Does she have a beautiful mother? Does she have a good father? If she has food in her belly? She has people who love her, who take care of her. And they all say, yes, 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 yes. And I say, well, she is the cause of those. Every single tiny good thing that has happened in her little life up until the age of 3, every tiny good thing, and if you counted them, there would be hundreds of thousands of good events, happy things for this little girl. They are the fruit of her past virtue. And I sometimes will leave it there. And sometimes we're so entrenched in the view of bad and blame and shame and guilt, we literally can't even hear it. But this is the thing. We only ever ask about the bad things. Nobody ever says, you mean that little girl who's got a wonderful mummy and a wonderful father and money in the bank and a beautiful and friends, you mean she deserves it? People don't even ever ask that question. So the heavy part is we have the concept of deserve. This is the part that's so heavy. Buddha doesn't talk like that. You don't talk, I deserve flowers, I don't deserve weeds. It's a heavy, heavy view, but that's the view we have with the dualistic view of punishment and reward. So we bring that view into karma. So then to try and get people to see that we are the creators of ourselves and all the happy things. But sometimes it's hard to work because we're so obsessed with the negative ones. And it's not that easy. But the broader view that we are the creators of our own reality, and especially all the happy things. But even most of us, even now as Buddhists, and we're old, we can't think that way. We still obsess about the negative. It's not an easy one. But that's the one I continually try to say, But if a person really can't handle it, a person I know recently who's been a Buddhist for years and everything, and she's got all these suppressed, memories of abuse by her mother, she almost thinks the teacher's abusing her by saying it's about karma. She can't even hear it. So it's all that indicates is the intense suffering of our deluded minds, I'm just giving one example of what I might discuss. All the time I keep stressing we are, that everything that happens to us, all the flowers, in other words, I use the garden analogy all the time. So, that all the flowers there, we would never forget the hard work we did to get those flowers. And then when we can own the flowers, I say, it's easy to own the weeds. So I always try to get to the bigger picture all the time, to try, if a person's capable of doing that. Namdrol, what do you think?
Yeah, sounds good to me. I'm with you.
I know, but it's not easy because we're so, and it's hard to see. You see, when we it's hard to see that we've already got very strong philosophical views entrenched in our mind. That's what's hard to see. Because the deepest pain of ego is that we're innocent victims. This is the part that's intolerable, why we go mad if we even think, and this is because we turn it into guilt. We turn it into this self-loathing. And this is why when we do this, the purification practice, it's unbelievably important. It's got nothing to do with guilt, but we have guilt deep in our bones because it's part of this dualistic view of punishment and reward. So to unpack all that is not that easy. So for me, it's just constantly finding creative ways to show the big picture. And for me, to try and also show how that's very empowering, that I'm in charge, that I can be the person, and that there's nothing set in stone. And the other crucial point is that it doesn't define us, Many points. I mean, it's a tough one to find the way to help people understand it. And sometimes people just cannot and won't and don't want to. And you can't do anything about that.
Venerable, continuing with this same theme.
Yeah.
My question is then, when something happens, I mean, we're talking about the example of this little girl, but close one could be, I lost my job, or this happened to my house.
Sure, that's right.
And we know that we created it. There should be a rejoice in the fact, or what should the feeling be?
The attitude, as we're developing more and more, like if you decide you're going to go to the gym, you're overweight, and you've got no muscle tone, and it's going to be really hard work, right? Isn't it? So when you come home from the gym, you know that you got such pain you can't believe it, right? You've discovered muscles you never knew you had. But nobody complains about it. People are delighted. You're overjoyed because you know the pain is a sign of progress. That's a good answer. But of course it's hard because the depth of ego grasping, the depth of the innocent victim, the depth of attachment and anger are so deep. It's really hard to get past this. It takes years and years of really solid practice of changing our thoughts, studying the view and practicing those views, and bucket loads of purification, because the depth of ego is so strong. It's huge. It's really huge. And this is why we suffer, because of these delusions. This is why we suffer. So rejoicing, of course, is the one, but of course it's hard. Even if you have the slightest, you just get, just recently I got this rash on my face. It's all gone now. And just a rash, it's not even sore. And I'm sitting there with all this self-pity. Lama Zopa, when he had a stroke, because these dudes, these amazing high beings, they're such examples, you almost can't believe they're real, Lama Zopa, when he had a stroke back in 2011, everybody who knows him says he's a high being. The way he behaves, the way he talks, he looks like he's a high being. I don't know, I'm not clairvoyant, I can't tell, but his behavior indicates it. Dalai Lama praises him. Everybody praises him. He's got a good reputation for being a high being, okay, which means he's authentic bodhisattva, or whatever you want to call it, maybe even a Buddha. So all I know is when he had his stroke, when you get a stroke, people have a panic attack. You get distressed, you're freaked out, you're suffering, you're in tears, you're having people around you are panicking. Well, the night he was at our centre in Victoria in Australia, in the country, 2011, and we're all at the teachings, and that night he had the stroke and they whizzed him off to the hospital, this local Catholic hospital, and all the nuns were there, or whatever. And Roger was with him, his attendant, and he would film him. He filmed, after he had the next morning, I think, he filmed him and asked Lama Zopa to give us a message. Well, Lama Zopa had this severe stroke, and he looked and sounded like a senile drunk person. Because he can't speak, and he's all puffed up, but he's laughing hysterically. He's laughing. This hospital could not believe these weird monks. His little Tibetan attendants, Roger sitting there day and night in a chair next to him. They're all laughing and cracking jokes, and Lama Zopa can't walk, and he's trying to do his swimming exercises, and he's constantly laughing and in joy. And when he talked about, it seemed to me like this stroke increased his compassion like 10 billion%. He was in bliss, thinking about all the people suffering, happy to have this suffering. That's an example of how we can be, but it seems like science fiction. I can't even have a happy mind with my bloody, a rash. If it's on my bottom, I wouldn't mind, but it'd be vain, you're on your face. So really we should be very humble from this, that ego grasping and delusions are kind of deep. So we should relax and enjoy, and know it's going to be a way to go, and don't get guilty and ridiculous, That's what we do. This delusion is just so primordial, to actually have a happy mind. But we can do it when you've got pain from... I'd come home from my Kung Fu classes. I was training 6 days a week. I'd be in heaven in my Arnica bath, aching and having an exhausted sleep. So we can be happy when the body hurts. But it's only as soon as the body hurts for another reason, we don't want to know, or the mind hurts, it's unbearable. So we've got to keep practicing, training our mind. It just takes time. Of course, the point is, for bodhisattvas, they would rather have a bad thing happen because it's now getting rid of the rubbish. And that's if we do understand the view of karma. Every time you pull out a weed, it's one less weed, isn't it? So I remember having a talk years ago in Miami. There was me, a Lutheran, a Jew, and a Catholic. Sounds like a joke, doesn't it? There was a talk, and the talk was, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, it was easy for me. I gave this talk about karma, and the rabbi clapped. The Catholic and the Lutheran, I don't know what they said. It was too complicated. But the rabbi clapped. And he said, we have the same view in Judaism. All the Jews in the audience were gobsmacked. They never heard of it. He's a Kabbalah rabbi. He said, we have a saying. Every time something bad happens, you go, great, one less debt to repay. So it's the same type of view, But these take time. It takes training the mind. And eventually you get like Lama Zopa when you enjoy having a stroke. Because he's, getting closer to Buddhahood, so he can help sentient beings, increases his compassion. I mean, just can't believe it. You can't believe it when you see it, Do you understand, Rosio? What else, people? We've only got a little bit of time left. Let's talk about emptiness then. That's where we're getting us. I suppose we're getting to emptiness, aren't we? Okay, all this is leading us to emptiness. That's why this whole path is so coherent, so delicious, Brilliant Atisha and brilliant Tsongkhapa presenting it for us. So, okay. So now the last two of these perfections, as we know, are where you perfect the wisdom wing in your meditation. The first four are you perfecting the compassion wing, bopping along from life after life after life, connecting to sentient beings, practicing generosity, morality, patience, and perseverance, blah, 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 on the basis of all the previous practices. Perfecting, becoming a Buddha. So emptiness, it's very confusing to us, It's very confusing to us because I think we just have to learn the words properly. But one of the key things, if we see Tsongkhapa's business, which is Buddha's best one, as Lama Yeshe says, the king of logics, to prove it, you see emptiness in the framework of the two truths, okay? That's the best way to never fall into the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says. So we've got the way things exist conventionally, and then we have the way things exist ultimately. And the way to guarantee we don't fall into the abyss of the great mistake when we hear the words, ultimately there is nothing from its own side, ultimately nothing has an intrinsic nature, ultimately everything is empty of existing intrinsically, etc., etc. Then so to ensure when we hear that we don't go, there's nothing anyway, so I might as well kill myself, it doesn't matter anyway, everything's empty. This is the commonest mistake, and an easy mistake to make. The commonest mistake when we hear emptiness is to hear it as nothingness, to hear it as nihilism, That's the abyss of the great mistake. So the way to ensure we never do that is to see it in the framework of how things exist conventionally. So, dependent arising, or dependent origination, or interdependence, or dependent relation, there's different terms that have slightly different meanings sometimes, but in general, this is the shorthand for how things exist conventionally. Then you've got the word emptiness, which is shorthand for the way things exist ultimately. So these two actually, these two are the flip side of the same coin. As Lama says, dependent arising is the way to prove emptiness. So clearly they've got a relationship. To think about dependent arising, the thing you think about is dependent arising, and that triggers the insight into the ultimate, which is said to be emptiness. So when we think about meditating on emptiness, you're not really meditating on emptiness. You do at a certain point, but the thing that gets you to that is by meditating on dependent arising. You're using logic to deconstruct and argue with the misconceptions. And what that logic does, what that analysis does, is trigger the ha-ha moment. Oh, I see. There's nothing from its own side. And then you can meditate one-pointedly on that emptiness. So dependent arising is the work you do. But right now, of course, we have the two wrong views, We have the two extreme views. When we hear emptiness, we chuck the baby out with the bathwater and we fall into the abyss of the great mistake and say it's nothingness. This is the commonest mistake. I mean, what do I know? I'm just trying to quote what my lamas taught me, It's the commonest mistake in the literature. Then when you hear dependent arising, that there is something Okay, emptiness, as Lama Zopa says, from the side of this thermos, there is nothing there that makes it a thermos. This is basically what you're saying. There's nothing from the side of the thermos, not one atom from the side of the thermos that is the thermosness of the thermos, that it's got nothing from its own side. We can't help but hear, oh, there is no thermos. Too far. You've gone too far. You've chucked the baby out the bathwater. Then we hear that Buddha tells us, there is a thermos, a dependent arising thermos, and we kind of squeeze our brain. Make up your mind, mate. He's saying there is a thermos that does exist in dependence upon causes, parts, and finally the mind labeling it. That's the logic. So then as soon as we hear that there is a dependent arising thermos, we over-exaggerate the other extreme and we reify it and we go, thank God there's something after all. Grasp. So we have the two extremes. So these two extremes are philosophical views. The extreme of eternalism is a philosophical view that the Christians teach, that the Muslims teach, that the Hindus teach, that the Greeks, they call it an essence. There is something intrinsic there. There is something there. Even all the lower Buddhist schools indicate there's got to be something there. It's only the Prasangika Madhyamika that say, kind of like the courage to say there's nothing there, but it doesn't mean there's nothing. That's the tricky bit. These are just words first. So as Lama Zopa says, when we have realized the emptiness of the thermos, it's as if there's no thermos. But babies, I'm sorry, there is a thermos. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. This is a brilliant, delicious way of putting it. This is the yogi's experience, So what we've got to see is that dependent arising and emptiness, on the face of it, appear opposite. But in reality, they are turning towards the middle way. They are referring to the same thing. And when you finally become a Buddha, you finally cut all misconceptions, all duality, and for you, finally, when you're a Buddha, that you cognize emptiness and dependent arising simultaneously. That's the final cutting of all the duality, So, let's unpack it a bit. We've got some time. So the first one, the dependent arising, is causes, and we did that with karma. Now let's go to the second one. This is a really interesting and very tricky and very interesting one. But this is not the subtlest yet. But this is all in the Lam Rimets. Pabonka and all of the Lamas always say this is the analysis we have to do, the 4-point analysis, So basically what Buddha's saying is this. First of all, we have to establish there's things exist conventionally, and then things exist ultimately. So before we discuss the ultimate character of how things exist, we have to first establish what does exist conventionally. This is a really, really crucial point. We have to establish something as existing conventionally. That means we have to name it, and then we have to define it. Then we can begin to discuss how it exists. So, what's that, Mummy? I'll say. And she'll say, well, darling, that's called a thermos. That's the label for it. Then she has to give me a definition. She has to tell me what it is. Otherwise, we're all over the place, She has to define her terms. So you can argue that a definition has two parts, really. Andy, you want to brush or something? You want to go away and do your hairdressing somewhere else?
I was just getting my hair tie out, that's all.
Close your camera off. Don't do your beautifying in the middle of a class. Close your camera.
Sorry.
Well, you should be sorry. I don't want sorry. Excuse me. Anyway, Andy, you're a nice boy. So, now listen, Andy. See how you're empty, dear. Listen to it. So your mummy will say, look at this thermos. You see what it is, don't you? It's a flat-bottomed metal container. That's the first part of the definition. It's its conventional characteristics. But you're not happy yet. But mummy, what does it do? I can't describe to you how important this is when you want to understand emptiness. You've got to know the function. What is it? What is its job? What is its actual meaning? This is unbelievably important in order to realize emptiness. You've got to know what a function is. Because when you realize emptiness, things still function. You've got to know what function means. So what is it? Function. What does it do? What is its meaning? Oh, sweetheart, it keeps my tea warm. Well, don't believe her. We'll believe anything anyone tells us is rubbish. We're stupid. She's got to prove her point. So she'll get her tea, and she will get it, and she will pour. And then she'll put the lid on it, and then she'll keep it for 2 hours, and she'll come back, and she'll take the lid off, and she'll prove the point that it kept the tea warm. Now we're getting pretty close to establishing the existence of a thermos conventionally. There's still more to do. She's got to now make sure there's no other agreement in the world that we live in, that we all know about, where there's another definition of this thermos. And there's even more to do after that, but that's good enough, So we've established now a conventional thermos. We've got it right so far. Now what we have to do is look into how it exists conventionally. Because why? Because that's the king of logics, to prove the emptiness of it. You don't just go into emptiness. The thermos is empty, the thermos is empty, the thermos is empty, hoping something will happen. That's demented. You have to use your brain, you squeeze your brain, as Amiyeshi says, to now look into the conventional reality of the thermos, because that's the argument you use, that's the logic you use, that will trigger the insight. There's no intrinsic emptiness, there's no intrinsic thermos. So dependent arising, the conventional reality, the dependent arising on what it is and how it functions, this is vitally important. This is the nuts and bolts of the work we have to do in our mind, you know. Okay, now let's use the phenomenon called me. All of your me, because that's our favorite word, isn't it? I is the central player in our heads. And so what kind of phenomenon is that? Because when you study, as you know, philosophy, you're going to learn several synonyms for that which exists. You're going to learn the word object, object of knowledge, existent, established base. There's many, there's several. That's 4 synonyms at least for that which exists. And why is this so important? Because Buddha says we're in la la land in relation to what exists. So at least these are the words. So what we have to establish is that. So we've established an existent. A thermos is an existent. We've labeled it, we've named it, we've defined it, we've proven it, and now we can begin to discuss how it exists conventionally, which is the logic we use to prove its emptiness, because this is the final point. Okay, let's do that. But now let's look at the other one. We're another phenomenon. We're not a thermos, we're not a toilet, we're not a computer, we're a person. So Buddha is a person. A dog is a person. A human is a person. A hell being is a person. Person, me, I, they're all synonymous, okay? Person, me, I, they're all synonymous. So we're one of that type of phenomena. We're that kind of phenomena. So I forget what the definition is. It's a weird definition. Someone who creates karma or something, whatever. But let's just establish we are examples of that kind of phenomena. So now let's take that phenomenon, the one called I, and start to go to the second level of dependent arising, and now to see what Buddha's telling us, that because of this ego grasping, because of this ignorance, Maitripa, we believe 1,000,000,000%, without question, and have since beginning this time, that there is in here, among all the millions of parts, all the parts of me, body and mind, and we can see the mind has millions of parts and the body has millions of parts. We can see that. So a person is made up of many, 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 many parts. This is really evident. Everything that exists, including permanent phenomena, have parts. Only the impermanent have causes. So here we're going to look at this argument. And basically, because of this ignorance in our mind, we totally believe that there does exist in here somewhere, and you establish very clearly the parameters, this, where the me is, we believe totally that there is in here a particular part walking hand in hand with all the other parts, as my friend Pende says. We believe utterly and completely there's a very special part that's called me, I, without which there won't be a me. We believe it's the boss. We believe it's like the running the show, the puppeteer, the boss. This is not the grossest mistake. This is not the subtlest mistake. But we do this analysis to lead us to the subtlest one, So what we have to do is unpack and unravel that misconception. It's a load of rubbish. We never question it. So we've got to use different logical arguments to look and see how this is just not viable. How not only you won't find a separate piece called I, but you don't even need one, Buddha says. We don't need one. It's a load of rubbish. It's a very shocking concept to us. So let's just do some of the analysis. Well, I like the analysis of IKEA. You've looked on the computer, and and then there's a nice thing called Andy on there, and you're going to go and buy an Andy, which is the name for that I there. So he goes to the IKEA. I'm just a bit silly, but get my point. You go to IKEA and you get a box, and it's full of what? There's no Andy built in there. There's no table. There's no cupboard. It's millions of bits. Now, this is really a crucial thing to understand. When you do the analysis of parts, this is going to help us prove There's not a part called I. You've got to be very precise and logical. So we know these clever IKEA people, they don't just chuck in 5 hands and 3 legs and 4 kidneys and hope for the best. They have worked out, they've constructed a table, they've constructed a lamp, they've constructed an Andy or a Robina, and then they've broken it all down into its component parts and chucked it in the box because it's easier to sell it that way. Now listen to this. So you're going to take it home, and this is the point about the parts. There's going to be millions of parts there, but the table's maybe 20, but there's going to be millions of parts. There's going to be millions of bits of the body, and there'll be millions of bits of the mind. And the crucial point is there'll be the precise correct number. You'll have exactly the right for your right hand, each of the fingers, exactly the number of ligaments, each of the bits. Think about it. Imagine you're constructing this person, and you'll have all the right pieces, all the bits of the mind, the bit of anger, the bit of attachment, exactly whatever Robina is, and you'll put them all together. But all the time we're anxiously looking and hoping we're going to uncover very soon the very special part that's called I. We believe that is there. Look at the way we talk. I have a nose. So this is bringing us now to one of the many arguments we have to do. As we know, they say in the literature, if something exists, it's either going to be one or many. We've got no options. So this is a really good analysis to do. Let's do that one now as we continue to search for the I. Okay. I'll make a statement that I'm making a statement now. I have a mala and a thermos, okay? So now, remember we went back to the object, phenomenon, object of knowledge, existent, established base. These are all terms for that which exists. And they're kind of like things that exist are nouns. The mind cognizes nouns. It's like that. That's my way of saying it. It cognizes things. Whatever the mind cognizes is that which exists, is the axiomatic. The definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind. And the mind cognizes like nouns. So how many nouns here? It's 3, isn't it? Mala was a pronoun, I, mala, and thermos. Now listen to this. If that's a valid statement conventionally, very simple, if that's a valid statement conventionally, you have to point out 3 nouns, each of which is not the other. Each of which is, this is a simple example, each of which is separate and each of which, they're different. They're separate and they're different. And then that means they're not dependent. So the thermos can break, mala is fine. A thermos does not depend upon a mala for its existence. So it's separate, it's different, and it's independent. It's really simple. Robina could drop dead. The mala will be fine. So that's 3 separate, independent, different phenomena. That's an easy example. Now let's get more nuanced. I will tell you now, I have a nose and an ear. Now same, how many nouns there? 3. I, nose, ear. I, nose, ear. So we need to come up with the same thing. If there is a separate piece called I, it will exist without depending on the nose. It will exist without depending on the ear. And you'll be able to point out the I that isn't the nose, and the ear, you'll be able to point out the nose, which isn't the eye and isn't the ear, and you'll be able to point out the ear, which isn't the eye and which isn't the nose. This is the same before. Now we'll see. I can point out an ear, no problem. Look, there it is, ear. And we can point out its function. And we can point out a nose, and they're separate, aren't they? They don't depend upon each other. My nose can be cut off, my ear will still listen. My ear can be blocked, but my nose will still blow snot. We know this. Simple, ordinary example. So, of course, where's the third phenomenon? Where is the third phenomenon that we believe every second of the day, in a panic-stricken way, that there is a piece called I? We say it. I'll say to Andy, how dare you insult me, when he just said my nose was ugly. He'll say, no, Robina, I didn't say you were ugly. I said your nose was ugly. But look how we feel. Because I believe there is an I in here. There's the owner of the nose, and you just offended me. But we believe, there's 2 arguments. We either believe that the I is separate, or we believe the I is all the bits. And we have to do these 2 logical arguments to prove both of these are wrong, So this first one is there can't be a separate I. This is the point. If there were a separate I, when the nose is hurting, the ear doesn't hurt, I promise. So the ear is looking on and saying, oh, poor nose, I'm so sorry for nose. Phew, I'm glad it's not me. Well, so is the I. If there were a separate I that is the owner of the nose, like I'm the owner of the mala and the thermos. Look, So if there is an eye that owns an ear and owns a nose, that eye is also not affected when the ear hurts. The eye is watching going, phew, I'm glad I didn't get hurt. Poor old ear, look at it, getting upset. You'd have to prove it, you have to see it. And that's what Buddha says in this analysis. We've got to do the search. We've got to look in that IKEA box at every single part and check where, and this is a precise, logical analysis. It's not just some airy-fairy trip you're supposed to do, you know. But the IKEA one's good because you've got hundreds of parts. You've got to look exactly, and then you keep constructing Robina, keep constructing, and you can't find the eye. You think IKEA's made a mistake. Where's my eye? Well, honey, you don't need an eye. This is the point. The parts will do just fine on their own. They don't need a separate eye. They don't need a bloody boss. Just like the universe doesn't need a creator. It's an extra embellishment. It's a dualistic view. You don't need a piece called eye. So what is the eye then? Well, you know, as Geshe Sopa says, and the Lamas say, there is an eye. This gets tricky now, more nuanced. There is an eye, but you can't point it out. It's not separate. The eye is the name we give to those parts. So the eye and the parts are not the same, but you can't separate them. This is where it's more nuanced. So this is where it sort of feels like they're getting tricky, you know. What do you mean? There's either an eye or there's not, Buddha. Make up your mind. But it's more subtle than that. But we've got to do the search first. And this is the point where you can make a mistake. As His Holiness says, the first job is to search for those pieces in that IKEA box. And you finally put the entire pieces of Robina together, and she's working perfectly. And you didn't have a piece called eye. That would bring the powerful. This is not Dalai Lama, it's me talking. That would bring the powerful recognition. There is no eye that's separate from the parts. There is no eye that's separate from the parts. But as His Holiness says, it's not as if you chuck out, so then you do the reverse process and you unpack Robina. She's all packed up again. So you pack her all unpacked, looking for the eye. It's the same process, but the other one's reversed. You know, you're building the Robina. Here you unpack the Robina. You're looking for that eye. And so His Holiness says, it's not as if you just chuck out all the parts and go, oh, well, there's no eye in the box, so there's no eye. That's nihilism. That's where we stop, and that's nihilism. Because the thing is, you won't find a separate eye. There isn't one. But that doesn't mean there's no eye. As His Holiness says, the eye isn't empty of existing from its own side because you can't find it. You won't find it, but that's not the real premise. The eye is empty of existing from its own side because it's a dependent arising. And that's the final conclusion. That's where you never fall into the abyss of the great mistake. If you leave it, there's no part there called I. Oh, well, there's no I. That's nihilism. But you haven't gone far enough, because this is where the dependent arising comes in and finally merely labeled. Because what I is the name you give to those parts. And that realization comes after you've realized emptiness. And then you'll never fall into the abyss of the great mistake. And this is what Buddha says in the Heart Sutra. It's straight there in the Heart Sutra, you know. He says, you know, like the Heart Sutra is wonderful. I remember, you know how it always says, you know, it says in the Heart Sutra, there's a great host of monks and a great host of bodhisattvas. And I always wondered where they all sat, because if you've been to Vulture Peak, you know, it's a really miniature place, you know. And I always wondered where they sat. So I asked Geshe Dugpa in San Francisco where they all sat. He said, oh, what do you think? In the sky. So I love that. So all you're sitting in the sky, and there's Buddha, and this is how he gave a lot of his teachings. There he is sitting in meditation, basically. He's blissing out in meditation on emptiness. But he's channeling his thoughts to Shariputra and then Avalokitesvara as a 10th level bodhisattva, a person, you're looking like a human. And they're having a conversation. But actually it's Buddha's teachings. So as we know, Shariputra asks, how should any child of family wishes to engage the practice of family wisdom, how he should look upon it. So then Avalokitesvara says, Shariputra, any son or daughter of a good family who wishes to engage in the practice of family wisdom should look upon it like this. He or she beholds but by scans in their own being they are empty. So what it is, basically, Avalokitesvara proceeds, doesn't he, to list all the different categories of phenomena according to Buddha's view of the universe, the five aggregates, the components of a person, the 12, the 18 constituents, the 6 senses, the object of the senses, and the 6 sense bases, the 12 links, the 4 noble truths, etc., etc., etc. And we have to look at each one in exactly the same way of analysis, like we did with IKEA, you know. So, as he says at the very beginning, Avalokitesvara says, Form is the first of the 5 aggregates, okay? Form is the one that's referring to the physical, if you like. So he uses that as an example, but it's referring to all the others. You can use any word in there, it's the same, but it's the same thing. He says form is empty. Then he says emptiness is form. Then he says form is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than form. So what does he mean? Because this is where you get real confusion. Well, technically it's not right, but it's the meaning. I'm just quoting His Holiness here, you know. So what does he mean by this? So this is the way we can really put the two truths together. This is how we can put the two truths together and never fall into the abyss of the great mistake. So this gets us to have to understand now. Remember I said before, got all the universe consists of billions of phenomena, and they're all nouns basically. Think of it's my way of putting it. They're nouns, or they're noun phrases. The mind cognizes a noun, okay? So if I pick up my cup and I go to drink, and then I'll go, oh, my cup's empty. We'll say that. You look in your bank, you're expecting $5,000, but there's $2 or something, or $0, even better, a good example. Oh, where's my $5,000? You'll say, my bank account is empty. Where's my $5,000? So we sort of talk in this ordinary way. We always say, oh, something's empty. You're looking for the party in a hotel, and you open the door, oh no, the room's empty. You know it's meaning empty of people. This means empty of tea. That means empty of money. So what I'm trying to get at is this. The way the mind cognizes things as nouns, as I said, like as a phenomenon. If I open my cup and I see tea there, I'll look in my cup and I'll say, tea is in my cup. So the cup is the basis, and then inside there is tea. So tea is a phenomenon that does exist in my cup. That's a fact. I'll go. Now, this is the point. I'm expecting tea in my cup, and I go to drink, and then I go, oh, my cup's empty. So how does my mind cognize that? My mind cognizes the phenomenon called absence of tea. It's like the way to put it as a noun. So emptiness of tea. The word emptiness is a noun, but it happens to be like a negative noun. Emptiness. Something's missing. So this is one point interestingly too. The only person who's ever going to notice the emptiness of tea in a cup is the person who expects the tea. The only person who will see the emptiness of $5,000 in the bank is the person who expects $5,000. The only person who will recognize the emptiness of people in a room is the person who expects people in a room. This is a really important point. So the mind cognizes phenomena. Tea is a phenomenon. Tea is a phenomenon. Where does it exist? In my cup. Now, I discover there's no tea in my cup. Put that as a noun. It's called emptiness of tea. Where does that emptiness of tea exist? In my cup. If I put my hand in my pocket for $5, my hand goes in expecting $5. I'll go, oh, my pocket's empty. So what did I just discover? I discovered the phenomenon. My mind cognized the phenomenon called absence of $5. If I'd found $5, my mind would have cognized the presence of $5. Here, my mind cognized the absence of $5. Now, my pocket is just merely empty. There's nothing in it. There's nothing in it. But I don't just go, oh, there's nothing in it. I'll go, where's my $5? So the absence of something is what you find when you thought there was something there. It's not just nothingness. My pocket might be empty all the time, but if I'm not expecting $5, my pocket it's like nihilism. There's nothing there. But that's not emptiness. The emptiness of $5 is what you'll find when you expect $5. The emptiness of $5,000 in the bank is what you'll find when you expect $5,000. The emptiness of an inherent I is what you'll find when you expect an I to be there. So Zamazopa says, when you've realized the emptiness of your inherent I, the emptiness of an intrinsic I, the absence of an intrinsic I, the lack of an intrinsic I, he says the best yogis have unbelievable fear. But the best yogis have bliss and joy because finally they've realized there's never has been, isn't, and never could be an intrinsic I. But we've believed in it since beginningless time. So it's like another example, as I say, Namdrol is colorblind. And whenever we show her a silver thermos, she sees pink because her eyes are wrong. She might even know it's not true, but pink appears to her because her eyes are wrong. So we fix her eyes. We fix her eyes. And we'll show her the silver thermos again. She won't just go, oh, it's silver. She'll go, oh my God, it's not pink. Why? Because she's expecting pink. So we've been believing in intrinsic eye since the beginning of this time. So we're always expecting. So to discover for the first time in single point of concentration, for the first time you see nakedly that there never has been, isn't, and never could be that kind of eye. That's the realization of emptiness. It's not nothingness, it's the opposite. So when we show her the thermos, she'll get a shock. She will go, oh my God, it's not pink. What she just cognized then was the emptiness of pink. And that's a real vivid phenomenon that exists for her mind. Now, why does Buddha say form is empty? And then he says emptiness is form. This is the point. Okay. The tea example is the same. Tea exists where? In my cup. Tea exists in my cup. Then if I think there's tea in my cup and there's not, so then I'm going to cognize another phenomenon called absence of tea, lack of tea, emptiness of tea, non-existence of tea. So where does that non-existence of tea exist? In my cup. I put my hand in my pocket for $5 and I might find $5. Where does the $5 exist? In the cup, in my pocket. If I discover the absence of $5, where does the phenomenon that does exist, that's a real phenomenon that my mind is cognizing, where does that phenomenon called absence of $5 exist? Right in my pocket, exactly where I expected it to be. I expected the $5 to be. So emptiness is a characteristic of form. Wherever you find form, you will find the emptiness of intrinsic form. And wherever you find the emptiness of intrinsic form, you will find form right there. This is the two truths together. You cannot have one without the other. And this is Heart Sutra telling us from the Buddha right in the beginning. You can't have nihilism. It's not possible. Because emptiness of existence. So you can put any word there. You could, Namdrol could go, wherever there is silver thermos, there exists the emptiness of pink thermos. And wherever she finds the emptiness of pink thermos, there is the existence of silver thermos. You could say any word there. Where I is empty. Emptiness is I. Emptiness is nothing other than I, and I is nothing other than emptiness. So spell it out. Wherever there's a conventional I, wherever there's a dependent arising I, there exists right there on that dependent arising I, the emptiness of intrinsic I. And wherever you find the emptiness of intrinsic I, you will find right there the presence of the dependent arising I. So form is empty, emptiness is form. Form is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than form. You can't have them separate. That's the thing to get. Then we won't fall into the abyss of the great mistake. Then we won't just think means nothingness, which is how we hear it. Which is nihilism. That's why, well, it's all empty anyway, so it doesn't matter, we say. Nihilism, mistake, abyss of the great mistake. So by seeing emptiness in the framework of dependent arising, we will never lose the plot, So do you have any questions for me? No questions, people.
I have a question, Venerable.
Who is it? David.
David.
Talk to me, darling. Yeah.
I'm an old boyfriend.
Good, yes. Okay.
I'm curious if a Buddha no longer cognizes emptiness, given they no longer expect inherent existence.
No, it's a very good point, isn't it? It's interesting. It's a very good point, isn't it? It's a really good point. So the thing is also, the other one is this, you see. First of all, the Heart Sutra, it's spoken from the perspective of a yogi in single-pointed concentration on emptiness where there are no appearances of anything. That's one thing. So once a Buddha sees everything as real, it's true, it seems to be it's implicit that things have no intrinsic existence because they see dependent arising. So you could almost really say that, I don't know, it's a very interesting point, isn't it? But you have to know about emptiness. You'd have to be there, the implicit the absolute understanding of it. But if you're living as a Buddha, if you're living in the Dharmakaya and not manifesting in a body, then you just you're just in this bliss, There's no appearances of anything. But if you're manifesting in bodies, which is what Buddhas do, they're bopping around manifesting in Pure Lands or they're manifesting in human realms. So they're always got to see conventional phenomena. So they will know simultaneously. The appearance of something dancing in front of you looks like it's existent from its own side. But even the greatest yogis still see things as existing from their own side, but they don't believe it. Whereas the Buddha sees the two simultaneously. That's all I can say, they say. So they'll never be fooled by the appearances of things. It's like an illusion, Lama Zopa says. It's like an illusion. And I think the discussion has to be for a Buddha who's in a form, who's seeing things, and good and bad and up and down and black and white. That has to be the form of the question. If you're just in the Dharmakaya, there's just the mind is in subtle bliss. I don't know. That's the best way to answer it, I think, isn't it? That do?
All right, thank you.
Okay. They say finally, the Buddha, it's only the Buddha, when you've finally removed all the obstacles in the mind, you then see the two truths simultaneously. That's what they say, Even the yogi, the greatest, highest yogi, before they've achieved the final Buddhahood, they still see things moving around, but they're not fooled by it. They know it's not inherent, but it still appears inherent, which is conceptuality. It's all conceptuality. Whereas the Buddhas can't have, they live in concept, they're pretending to be conceptual, but they're not buying into it at all, How you read all those tantric texts about illusion and dance and all this business. There's all these yogis who see reality, It's an interesting point, yeah. Go, who else, people? What other questions, people? Any other questions? Will that do? Is that somebody? Laura, darling. Yes, hello. Hi, sweetheart. Hello, sweetheart.
Hi. I just had a quick question about the functioning of karma.
Yes.
So is it the case that karma could not function if it weren't empty of inherent existence?
Oh, with absolute certainty, because dependent arising implies emptiness. So cause and effect implies emptiness. There couldn't be cause and effect. There couldn't be emptiness without cause and effect, and there couldn't be cause and effect without emptiness. With absolute certainty, yeah. Nothing could exist.
And so when we're talking about dependent arising as being the king of logic for proving emptiness, we're not only talking about karma as an example of one kind of dependent arising.
No, that's the very first level, and it's not complete enough. We've got the second one, which is parts, which is where we're looking in the IKEA box, and the third one is finally that things have no existence separate from the mind that labels it that. That's the subtlest one, merely labeled. That's the actual one. That's the final one.
But we like the teaching of karma and its relationship to emptiness because it sort of gets us on the right track.
That's right. That's my feeling. As we really buy into the view that I created myself, that everything that appears to me is what I created, that there's no accident, therefore you stop being self-piteous, you stop blaming, you stop anger, you stop guilt. So that's leading you to it's smashing ego grasping. It's smashing the sense of a separate me. Absolutely. I find that a very powerful example. Do you understand?
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Good, Laura. Thanks. What else, people? Any points to bring up? So the word emptiness, we hear it as nothing but emptiness is a phenomenon. It's a characteristic that's called the absence of something. Like the absence of tea, if you like. I mean, speaking a bit loosely, these are simple examples, because tea could exist. Money could exist. Pink could exist. These are simple examples. But emptiness of inherent existence is a phenomenon that does exist. Mind cognizes things that exist. Mind grabs hold of nouns. So the presence of tea is a thing that exists, and the absence of tea is a thing that exists. The emptiness of inherent existence is a thing that exists. Where does it exist? Depends on which thing you're saying about as empty. If it's emptiness of cup, emptiness of inherent cup, then the emptiness of inherent cup exists right on cup. Form is empty, emptiness is form. The emptiness of inherent form exists right where the conventional form is. You can't have one without the other. It is impossible. That's why you cannot fall into the abyss of the great mistake. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So wherever there's the emptiness of inherent form, that phenomenon called the emptiness of inherent form, we go, oh, everything's empty. Everything's empty. Too vague. You're talking about a cup here. The emptiness of inherent cup exists right on the cup, right there, staring at you. It's a characteristic of a cup. So impermanence is a characteristic of this thermos. Silver is a characteristic of this thermos. Metal is a characteristic of this thermos. Well, emptiness of inherent thermos is a characteristic of this thermos. They all are characteristics of the thermos. So emptiness of inherent Robina is a characteristic of a conventional Robina. It's not there's no Robina in the sky somewhere, there's no Robina. No, there is no inherent Robina. Where? Here, right on Robina. Things have to exist somewhere in place and time. The emptiness of $5,000 exists exactly where you thought the $5,000 was. The emptiness of pink for Numdrol, when she realizes it, exists exactly where she thought the pink should have been. But those emptinesses are kind of like unhappy emptinesses. But a good emptiness, another one would be if Numdrol thinks she's got cancer. Or maybe she did at some point, and she had some sickness, I know. But let's just say she thinks she's got cancer. Let's say she just got married, she got 4 babies, and she's in bliss and in heaven, and life is perfect, and she's 30, and she thinks life is just beginning. And then she's shattered by this discovery that she's going to be dead in 6 months or something. So it'll be quite a painful thing to get used to, the presence of cancer. She'll be devastated. She'll try to calm her mind down and get used to impermanence and recognize she's going to die. And then she goes to the doctor and says, sorry, Numdrol, we showed you the wrong x-rays. You haven't got cancer at all. Well, what she will just realize that minute is very joyful, isn't it? She just realized the emptiness of cancer. She'll be over the moon. Well, this is the emptiness that the yogis will find, that they believe since beginning of this time, like all of us, that there is a real I there. Everything we've ever done since beginning of this time, born in the hells, born in the spirits, born in the animals, born in the humans, born in the gods, born in the anti-gods, born in the formless, born in the form. We've done all of that 1 billion times, all based on the belief of an intrinsic me. And then one day we followed what Buddha says, he goes further, and you've dug deeper, and you finally see for the first time that there never has been, isn't, and never could be an intrinsic I. And he says the greatest yogis, it's the most blissful joy in the universe. They've finally seen the truth. And that emptiness of the intrinsic I is the name of the phenomenon that they cognized. Then they realized dependent arising. That's the real premise, as His Holiness said. They've discovered that there has never been that intrinsic I, but they don't leave it there. That second, they realize dependent arising, which is conventional, merely labeled. That's realized after you've realized emptiness, because that's what exists. And that seems like it's affirming something as existing, but it seems like it's not that. It's very subtle. Yeah, what else? Time to go home.
Venerable, I have a quick question.
Yeah, and
I believe earlier in the lecture you connected the suffering of pervasive conditioning to inherent existence. Is that correct?
Well,
did you say that?
Yes, because, okay, yeah, thank you very much. So, okay, there are 3 levels of suffering for the Buddha, right? We learned that. There's suffering of change, and all pervasive suffering. So the suffering of suffering is annihilated, is stopped by creating negative, is stopped by stopping creating negative karma. That's the first scope of practice. That cuts the suffering of suffering. The second kind of suffering, the suffering of change, is cut by giving rid of attachment. The third kind of suffering is cut when you realize emptiness. You stop being reborn in the first place.
So they map onto the 3 scopes too. That's interesting.
Exactly, that's the point. Exactly right. So that's where the Hindus, they went as far as they could go. They got samadhi. They've got this amazing subtle concentration. They quit the gross suffering. They quit the suffering of change, and they thought that it was liberation. They got to the subtlest level, even the formless, with not even any aggregates. But they're sitting in this subtle absorption for eons, but they've still got ego grasping and they hadn't realized it. And then they'll fall back into the lower realms again. That's where Buddha went as far as he could go, and he knew there was further to go. So he diverged in his own direction, and he got to the subtlest level and realized there's no intrinsic I at all. Emptiness. That's where he did. And even then we know in the Buddhist schools, many of the Buddhist schools, all the way to Prasangika Madhyamika, still assert there has to be something. Every one of them has to, even the Sautrantika Madhyamika, whatever they call them, the Sautrantika Madhyamika, posit there's got to be something there, otherwise there's nihilism. It's only the Prasangika Madhyamikas that say there's nothing there without it being nihilism, because it's framed in the context of the 2 truths. It's very tasty. But your point is absolutely right, yes. Okay. Thank you, Andrew. What else, people? Any more? Time to go home? Nothing? Time to go home. 8, 3, what is it? 4, 5, 5:30 for you people. What do you think? Who's the boss here? Who's running the show? Tiffany. What do you think, Tiffany? We're time to go
You're the
home?
boss, Venerable.
Oh, am I? Oh,
it's
good.
5:30 is time for us. The class is
go.
generally over.
Okay, good. So you want to ask questions? Otherwise, we can go. Is there something more I should say? Did I cover the topic, you think?
You
Tiffany?
did beautifully. Thank you so very much.
Okay, good.
Are you well these days, Venerable? Are
I'm
you
good. I'm as
being
happy as
taken
Larry.
good care of?
Yeah,
Huh?
youngsters is so kind. He had these pujas done. He fixed all these things and did this and did that. And then he told Lama Zopa. Of course, Lama Zopa's medicine was. Youngster says, so kind, do this, take care of yourself. Lama Zopa says, I'm so glad you're sick. Good, see your rash as a ruffled deity. Be happy you're sick. We know that's Lama Zopa's style. So I tried to pretend to be happy for a while. Then it went. So thank you. I'm happy and fine.
Robina, just want to request on behalf of Maitripa,
Yes.
we hope to see you again very, very soon.
Oh, happy
Please
if you want.
when
Yeah.
you can.
Absolutely delighted, yeah. Of course, I'm sitting in
And
this little
please
house
have
in
a
Santa
long
Fe.
and healthy life.
Thank you, darling, please, all of you. Happy to see you all. Much love to all of you. So good. Much love, everybody. All of you. I didn't say all your names. I didn't see you all, but I'm seeing you all now. There you all go.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Venerable.
darlings. So we'll just do a little tiny prayer again. 2 little baby prayers. The thoughts are, here we've been for 2 hours and not a single thought has gone astray. As Geshe Tashi in London said, it's like we're shooting movies all day. Everything is stored in our memory. But not only that, we've also sowed all these marvelous, delicious karmic seeds. You know, how delicious. So we're going to nourish these seeds with our effort from the second forward, so they will eventually develop into, manifest as our Buddha. Why? So then we can really benefit others. That's the first prayer. And the second one made this marvelous aspiration of bodhicitta, this outrageous paradigm shift in the mind based on great compassion, that we'll never give up benefiting others and becoming a Buddha, so we can really be qualified. May it grow and grow. Kewadinyu dudai lama sangye drugyurne drowa chikyang malupa dei sala kupashok Jangchub semchog rinpoche make panam ke gyuchig ke panyampa me payang gong ne gong du pelbashok. Thank you, sweethearts. Very, very, very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Venerable.
darlings. Much love to you.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you,
Return
sweethearts.
very soon.
Bye.